There is no doubt that every belief in the world affects the lives and relationships of its followers and the establishment of the law in that society. Islam also has affected the life, relationship, and the law of Muslim societies through its sharia, which is based on the Quran, Muhammad's life, and the sayings of Muhammad and his successors. Sharia reveals the way of life for each Muslim. It instructs Muslims that the example of Muhammad must rule nations and make them Islamic in every aspect. At family level, father or husband is called to establish the codes of Sharia. And at state and global level, government is responsible for enforcing the principles of Sharia. Examples of these principles are laws about food, polygamy, the age of marriage, disobedience, criticism, level of punishment, alcoholic beverages, adultery, non-Muslims, jihad, etc. The central focus of Sharia is to Islamize everything and person. Its motive is conditional. You are not safe if you do not follow Islam. But the central emphasis in the path of Jesus Christ is the unconditional love. This unconditional love impacts the lives, relationships, and the laws of the followers of Jesus Christ in order to prepare them for peace with others. The Gospel of Christ says in the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all the mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing." Dear friends, the book of such amazing love and kindness is rejected by Muslim leaders with the excuse that the name of Muhammad does not exist in it. They do not know that such love from the true God is better than the names of all prophets. I'm going to give you some examples from the Sharia of Islam in comparison with the Gospel of Christ. Then you yourself will be glad to know why the name of Muhammad could not be in the Gospel. Family must be the most important unit for God, since He started the world with a family, Adam and Eve. Let us see which one, the Sharia of Islam or the Gospel of Christ, honors the family best. In the Sharia of Islam, a husband is greater than his wives and can beat them. Surah Al-Baqarah in verse 228 says that men have a degree of advantage over their wives. It is because of this masculine advantage that Surah An-Nisa, verse 34, and Surah Sa'd, verse 44, sanction that men have the right to beat their wives. Surah An-Nisa, in verse 15 and 16, even says that men have the right to lock their wives in a room for immorality until they die. But for the same immorality, men get some lashes and walk free. Why does the Quran sanction man's superiority to his wives and give him the right to beat his wives and even kill them? The reason of the Quran are Surah An-Nisa, verse 34, says that Allah has given men more strength to dominate women and force them to obedience. Various versions of the Quran say in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 23, that among Muslims, men are the only ones who have been true to their covenant with God. In other words, women cannot keep their covenant with God and always need to be corrected by men. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, also gives his own reason on why men have more rights than women. He said in the hadith of Al-Bukhari, number 301, in the book of 6 and volume 1, that women are lacking in intelligence. What do you think? Do you really think that men keep their covenant with God better than women? Doesn't this mean don't trust your mother and sisters? According to the Quran, you as a boy or man carry 2 times more value than your sister or mother in witnessing or receiving inheritance. This means that if your mother or sister informs you of something, you should not trust her unless another lady witnesses the same. But if your father or brother or a man witnesses something, he can be trusted. Imagine that in a society there is only trust in men, but not in women. Famous Islamic scholars call women crooked. The hadith number 113 of Bukhari in volume 7 says that woman was created from man's rib, crooked. This crookedness is inherent and incurable. Muslims hadith number 3467 in book of 8 says that woman has been created from a rib and will in no way be straightened for you. So if you wish to benefit by her while crookedness remain in her. And if you attempt to straighten her, you will break her. And breaking her is divorcing her. Dawood's hadith, number 2155, in book 11 says that Muhammad said, if one of you marries a woman or buys a slave, he should say, O Allah, I ask you for the good in her, and in the disposition you have given her. I take refuge in you from the evil in her and in the disposition you have given her. Hadith number 219 of Bukhari in book 88 and volume 9 says, when Muhammad heard the news that the people of Persia had made the daughter of King Khosrow their queen, he said, never will succeed such a nation as makes a woman their ruler. Since Muhammad and the Quran introduced women as evil beings, what will commentaries will say about women? Surah Ar-Rum in verse 21 says that women are created for men. Razi, a Sunni philosopher, in his commentary book At-Tafsir al-Kabir, while commenting on this verse, says, created for man is proof that a woman is an animal. Hadi Sabzwari, a Shia philosopher, in his commentary, Sadr al-Muta'alliqeen, says, women are truly and justly among the mute animals. They have the nature of beasts. It is so sad that these gentlemen were called philosophers and received much honor from their contemporary governments. The gospel of Christ does not say such heartbreaking things about girls and women. Husband and wife are equal in the eyes of God. The gospel says in the book of Galatians chapter 3, verse 28, that husband and wife have the same value for God. In the book of Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 and 28, it says that a man must love his wife as his own body. In the book of Colossians chapter 3, verse 19, it says, "Husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them." And in the book of 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7, it says that wives are the heir of God's grace with their husbands. Husbands' prayers will not be accepted if they do not understand and honor their wives. This has been a comparison of the treatment of women in Islam to the treatment of women in Christianity. Which one do you think should be the perfect religion? Now let us see the more shocking treatment of the family in the Sharia of Islam. Sharia asks children to disobey their guardians. Surah Tawbah in verse 23 is telling us that Muslim children should not accept the guardianship of their fathers or brothers if the guardians love other values more than the values of Islam. You know that mature children of a family do not need guardianship, but the immature ones. Here in this verse, the Quran is asking the immature children to disobey their guardians if they are not good Muslims. Will you be happy if someone encourages your children to disregard your fatherhood or guardianship? This is what the Quran does. As you are aware, there is a loving bond between animals and their young, just as there is between parents and their children. Even the most ungodly person loves his children. This is because God has created us to love each other. This loving bond is from God. The true God never teaches children to ignore their parents. You see how the Sharia is against the inherent love which is from God. If the Sharia treats its own Muslim family members unkindly, what do you think it will do to non-Muslims? Let us see the instructions of the Sharia of Islam about non-Muslims. Sharia does not treat non-Muslims as human. The Quran calls non-Muslims unclean. This is why non-Muslims who work in Saudi Arabia should stay 24 kilometers away from Mecca. Again, this has been why some Muslims had no choice but to wash their hands after shaking hands with non-Muslims. Or if they offered food and water to non-Muslims, to wash their plates and glasses in an Islamic way. I was taught from childhood, if we touched the non-Muslim, we had to wash ourselves in an Islamic way to purify ourselves. The Quran also calls non-Muslim worst of beasts, dogs, pigs, monkeys, and donkeys. Calling others as animals is treason to God, to humanity, and even to Abraham, who is called the father of both Jews and Arabs. Muhammad and Jews are both the offsprings of Abraham. How can God, who loved Abraham, say to his face that his offspring are animals? How could the grandchild Muhammad tell his grandfather Abraham that his grandchildren from Isaac were animals? Only the grandchildren from Ishmael were humankind. Isn't this disrespectful to grandfather Abraham, who loves his own grandchildren? By calling Jews animal, you are indeed saying to the grandpa that he produced animals. Sharia calls non-Muslims animals in order to legitimize murdering them. Surah Al-Anfal in verse 39 says, "Slaughter non-Muslims until there is no more disbelief in the whole world and all submit to the religion of Allah alone." This is the motivation behind much of the terrorism towards non-Muslims taking place in some Islamic countries. The Quran calls non-Muslims kafirs and says that they may be hated mocked, deceived, plotted against, enslaved, tortured, and killed if they do not follow Islam. This kind of attitudes and actions are fully rejected in the gospel of Jesus Christ. The loving, compassionate, and kind God does not ask his followers to persecute others for the sake of their belief. Friends, there is not a single verse in the entire gospel of Jesus Christ to encourage hatred or murder. You cannot find any verse like that. Why? Firstly, because God values the life of his creatures so much. Secondly, since we have not created people, we therefore do not have any right over their lives. It is not possible to create peace in the family or in society with hatred and hostility of sharia. But it is possible with the love and kindness of Christ. So the love of Christ is the better model for human relationships, not the sharia of Islam.